The thermometer outside her window read 60 below and falling. In a place like this, nothing survives the night alone. She had lived here for 43 years, alone for the last 11. That night, the wind changed. It came from the north sharp, like a blade drawn across bone. She was feeding the fire when she heard a sound that didn't belong to the wind. A scratching, faint, desperate, at the base of her door. She hadn't opened that door after dark in years. Out here, the dark belongs to things with teeth, but something in that sound. It wasn't a predator. It was a plea. She pulled the iron latch. The cold hit her like a wall of glass. And there, curled against the bottom of her door, barely the size of a dog, shaking, a bear cub, alone, in 60 below, no mother in sight, no tracks but its own, already filling with snow. She didn't think. She didn't weigh the danger. She bent down and picked it up. It weighed almost nothing, like holding winter itself in her arms. She stepped back inside, kicked the door shut against the howling dark. The cub didn't move, didn't fight. It just pressed closer, trembling against the only warmth it had known in days. She laid it by the fire, wrapped it in the wool blanket from her own bed. Its body was like ice. She could feel the cold radiating off it even through the wool. She boiled water, soaked rags in it, pressed them along its legs, its belly anywhere blood still moved. An hour passed. Then two. She didn't leave its side. Then, sometime near midnight, the cub opened its eyes and looked at her. She didn't know it then, but that look, that one quiet look, would change both their lives forever. Morning came slow and gray, the kind of morning where the sun barely clears the trees, and even then, it doesn't warm a thing. She woke before the light. She always did. Out here, sleeping late is how you freeze. First thing always the fire. Without it, nothing else matters. She fed it birch bark first, then kindling, then a split log. The same order. Every morning, for 43 years. She glanced toward the blanket by the stove. The cub was still there. Still breathing. Still alive. She had a routine. A way of moving through the cold that kept her alive. It started before sunrise and didn't end until dark. The woodpile. That was always first. Without wood, there was no fire. Without fire, there was nothing. Every swing of the axe cost her something. At her age, the cold doesn't just slow you down, it takes a piece of you each time. She carried the wood in bundles, 4 trips, sometimes 5, each one a small war against her own body. Water came next. The well was frozen over. It always was. She hauled the bucket up hand over hand. The water was already forming ice at the edges before she reached the cabin door. Inside, the cub had moved. Not far, just a few inches closer to the stove, but it had moved, and that meant something. She melted snow in the kettle, mixed it with a bit of dried fish, mashed it into a paste. It was all she had. She knelt beside it and held the bowl close. The cub sniffed once, twice, then buried its muzzle in the paste. She ate the same thing, the same portion. Out here, you don't give what you don't also take from yourself. On the wall above her cot, a single photograph. A man beside her younger, both of them laughing. The glass was cracked, the edges curled with age. His name was Dmitri. He built this cabin with his own hands. He died the winter of 2014 out by the woodpile. His heart just stopped. After he was gone, people said she should leave, move to the town, but she never did. This was their home. She wasn't ready to let it go. 11 winters alone. She had learned to speak to the cold, not with words, but with work, with rhythm, with endurance. But tonight, for the first time in 11 years, she wasn't going back to an empty cabin. The second morning, the cub tried to stand. Its legs shook like birch saplings in the wind, but it stood. By the third day, it was walking unsteady, bumping into the table legs, but walking. It discovered the woodpile first, tried to chew a log, gave up, sneezed sawdust across the floor. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that starts before you know it's coming. She couldn't remember the last time she'd made that sound. She checked the snare traps that afternoon. 2 were empty. The third held a hare, frozen stiff, but usable. She cooked it over the stove that night, half for herself, half for the cub. It ate with a hunger that made her chest ache. That night, for the first time, the cub climbed onto the cot. She didn't push it away, she just shifted to make room. She felt its heartbeat against her ribs, faster than hers, small and certain, like a clock that refused to stop. Days passed. The routine expanded to fit 2 lives instead of 1. More wood, more water, more reason to keep going. She began talking to it, not because it understood, but because silence, after enough years, starts to feel like dying. She told it about Dmitri, about the spring he built the porch, about his laugh deep, like rocks rolling downhill. She told it about the child they never had, the room they never built, the name they'd chosen, Anya, for a girl who never came. The cub didn't understand the words, but it understood the tone. It always pressed closer when her voice got quiet. A week in, she realized something had changed. Not in the cabin, not in the cub, in her. She started making repairs she'd been putting off for years. The door hinge, the table leg, the roof patch above the cot. She patched the gap beneath the door, the one where the snow blew in, the one the cub had scratched at that first night. 2 weeks passed. The cub grew stronger. She grew lighter, as if it was absorbing the weight she'd been carrying. She gave it a name, not a grand name, not a human name. She called it Mishka, Little Bear, the obvious choice, the only choice. Mishka. She said it again at dinner, again before bed. It felt good in her mouth, like a word she'd been saving for something. And so winter continued as it always did, as it always would. But now, there were 2 sets of prints in the snow. Weeks turned into a month,
so big, little one.
and Mishka was no longer the trembling creature she'd pulled from the snow. He was becoming a bear. He knocked the kettle off the stove, reaching for fish, dented it against the floor. She just picked it up and put it back. She took Mishka
Come out,
outside
my
for the first
little
time
friend.
on a bright morning. He stood at the
Time to
doorstep and
remember
wouldn't
where you
move,
belong.
as if he remembered what the cold had done to him. She waited. She didn't pull, didn't push, just stood in the snow and let him decide. 1 paw, then the other, then all 4. Mishka stepped into the snow and didn't look back. He played in the snow like he'd invented it, rolling, digging, biting mouthfuls of powder and sneezing it out in white clouds. From that day, Mishka went outside with her. Every morning, every task. A shadow made of fur and curiosity. He watched her chop wood, sat beside the stump like a foreman inspecting the work, occasionally sneezed when chips flew his way. At the well, he learned to wait. She couldn't have him too close to the edge. He seemed to understand that. By the 6th week, Mishka's shoulders were broadening. His paws, once delicate, were now as wide as her palm. He ate twice what she did now. She didn't mind. She just set more traps, walked farther, worked harder. Some mornings, Mishka would stop at the tree line and lift his nose to the wind, smelling something she couldn't smell, hearing something she couldn't hear. She knew what was happening. She'd seen it before with hawks, with foxes, with everything wild she'd ever touched. The world was calling him home, but not yet. Winter still held its grip, and Mishka still slept beside her every night. Then the second storm came, worse than the first, the kind that buries cabins and erases roads that no longer exist. She saw it coming from the window, had maybe an hour. She moved faster than she had in years. More wood, as much as the cabin could hold. She stacked it to the ceiling by the door. She filled every pot with water, sealed the window shutters, checked the stovepipe. There was nothing else she could do. The storm hit at dusk. It didn't arrive, it attacked. The walls shook. The stovepipe screamed. All night, the wind tried to take the roof. All night, the cabin held, barely. Mishka pressed against her all night. Not shaking this time, bracing, as if he knew his weight was holding her down. Morning came eventually. It always does, even when you stop believing it will. She opened the shutters. The world outside was gone, replaced by white. The snow had
It's
drifted
reached the
past the
windows.
windowsill.
No.
The door wouldn't open.
No.
The drift was packed
No.
against it 3
No.
feet deep,
I
frozen
can't.
solid. But Mishka smelled the outside. He put his shoulder against the door and pushed. The snow cracked, shifted, broke. She looked at him
Go,
standing
my
in the
son.
broken doorway, snow
The
falling
world
around
awaits.
him, light pouring in, and she saw what he was becoming. After the storm, something else changed. Mishka started disappearing for hours, returning at dusk with dirt on his paws and the smell of the forest in his fur. One evening, he came back with blood on his muzzle. He'd caught something, eaten it himself. He didn't need her food anymore. She didn't set his plate that night. She sat alone at the table and ate her fish in silence. She knew what she had to do. She'd known for weeks. But knowing and doing out here, those are different kinds of cold. She chose a clear morning. No wind, no storm on the horizon. If she was going to open the door and not close it again, she wanted the sky to be kind. She woke earlier than usual, fed the fire, boiled water, made fish paste his favorite. One last plate. Mishka ate without knowing, without understanding that this bowl was different from any other. She put on her coat, her hat, her boots. She opened the door to that perfect, cruel, beautiful morning. She walked past the woodpile, past the well, past the snare line. She kept walking farther than she'd gone in years. At the tree line, she stopped. Mishka didn't.
This is
He
your
walked
home.
straight into the forest like it had been waiting for him. She called his name, once, softly, not to bring him back, but to give him something to carry. Mishka paused, turned, looked at her from between the birch trunks, held her gaze for a long, still moment. Then he turned and walked deeper, and the trees swallowed him whole. She stood there until her feet were numb, until the sun had moved, until there was no reason left to stay. The walk back was the longest of her life. One set of footprints, one shadow, one heartbeat in the snow. She stepped inside, closed the door. The cabin was warm and completely, terribly empty. She picked up the tin plate from the shelf, held it, set it back, then picked it up again and washed it, as if that would close the chapter. Days passed. She fell back into the old routine: wood, water, fire, food. But the rhythm was off, like a song missing a note. She told herself it was the right thing. She said it out loud, standing by the stove, because there was no one left to say it to. A week after Mishka left, the woman woke coughing, a deep, rattling sound like something inside her had come loose. She got up, rebuilt the fire. Her hands shook so badly, the kindling scattered twice before it caught. She made it through that day, and the next. But each morning, the fire was harder to light. The wood was harder to carry. The well was farther away. On the fourth morning, she couldn't get out of bed. Her legs wouldn't hold her. The fire was already dead. The cold crept in first through the floor, then the walls, then the blankets. It found her bones and settled there like a guest that wouldn't leave. She didn't know how many hours had passed. The light at the window didn't change. Everything was gray and still and cold. She thought about Dmitri, about his hands, how they were always warm, even in January. She thought she could feel them now. Outside, the wind was building again. Another storm, the third of the season. This one had teeth. Inside, she heard the wind begin to moan. She knew what it meant. She'd survived enough storms to know this was the kind you don't survive without fire. She tried again to stand. Her legs buckled. She hit the floor. The cold earth against her cheek was like a slap from the world itself. She crawled, inch by inch, her fingers clawing at the frozen floor. She made it halfway to the stove before her arms gave out. She lay there, on the floor of the cabin Dmitri built, and for the first time in 43 years, she considered that this might be where she dies. The storm hit. The walls shook. The shutters screamed. And somewhere, far away, something else was moving through it. Mishka, miles from where she'd left him, moving against the wind, moving against every instinct that tells a wild animal to find shelter and wait. Back in the cabin, her breathing was shallow. Her fingers had stopped hurting, which meant they'd stopped feeling. which meant time was running out. Then, through the storm, through the wind, through the walls, she heard something, a sound she knew, a sound from another life, scratching at the base of the door, the same sound, but deeper now, stronger. She tried to call out his name, Mishka, but her voice was gone, frozen in her throat, like everything else. The scratching stopped. For one terrible moment, silence. Then the door exploded inward. Mishka found her, on the floor, not moving. He dropped his head to her face and breathed hot, wild, alive against her frozen cheek. Her eyes opened. She saw him. That face. Those eyes. Older now, wilder, but the same, still the same. She whispered it. Barely a sound, but he heard it. Mishka. What happened next? She would never fully understand, but the bear moved with purpose, as if he knew exactly what the cabin needed. He lay down beside her, all 400 pounds of him, pressed his body against hers, and the heat, God, the heat was like the sun had crawled inside the cabin. She didn't move, couldn't move, but she felt the warmth spreading from her back to her chest, from her chest to her hands, from her hands to her fingers. She was alive. Hours passed. The storm raged. But inside the cabin, something was changing. The frost on the walls nearest the bear began to weep. She slept. Really slept. For the first time in days. Not the sleep of dying, the sleep of someone held. She woke in the dark. The storm had quieted. The bear was still there. She could feel its heartbeat, slower than hers now, steady, like a drum holding the rhythm of the world. When morning came gray and still, she could sit up. She could move her hands. The fever was breaking like ice in spring. She reached for the stove. This time, she made it. Her hands shook, but they found the birch bark, found the embers that weren't there. She would build this fire from nothing. The fire caught. The flame grew. And the cabin, Dimitri's cabin, remembered what warmth was. She boiled water, the first hot thing she'd had in days. She held the cup in both hands and wept, not from sadness, from the simple, staggering mercy of being warm. She looked at him, this bear, this impossible creature who had walked through a killing storm to find her, and she understood something she'd known all along. She wasn't alone. She hadn't been alone since that first night. Not really. Not ever again. Outside, the storm passed. The stars appeared cold and sharp and ancient, and from the cabin, for the first time in days, a thin thread of smoke rose into the night. The days after the storm were quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after something almost ended and didn't. She moved slowly those first mornings. Her body remembered what it had been through even when her mind tried to forget. Mishka didn't leave her side. Not for the forest, not for the tree line, not even for the door. He stayed. She tried to go to the woodpile. He blocked the door, gently but firmly, as if to say, not yet. So she sat. She drank hot water. She watched the fire. And she let herself be taken care of for the first time since Dimitri. He brought her something the second day, dragged it through the broken door and dropped it on the floor. A hare, freshly caught, still warm. She cooked it that evening. 2 portions. One for her, one for him. Just like before, but backwards. Everything was backwards now. And somehow, that made it right. By the 3rd day, she could walk to the woodpile. Mishka came with her. He carried a log in his mouth, just like he had during the second storm. She let him. She fixed the door that week, used wire and a plank from under the cot. It wasn't pretty, but it held. A week after the storm, she woke to something she hadn't heard in months. Silence. Not the silence of cold, but the silence of waiting, as if the world was holding its breath for something. She started keeping count, scratching a line on the door frame each morning. Not counting days survived, counting days shared. She talked to him more now. Real conversations about the weather, the traps, the creak in the roof beam. He listened the way Dimitri used to, with his whole body. Some evenings, she read to him. An old book, water-stained, pages curled, the only one she had. Pushkin. He didn't understand the words, but he never left the room. She grew stronger each day. The cough faded. Her legs held. The routine returned, but it was different now. It belonged to both of them. But she knew the way you know weather or grief, or the turning of seasons, that this chapter too would close. Mishka was a bear, and bears belong to the forest. He started leaving again, an hour at first, then half a day. Then one morning, he didn't come back until the stars were out. But he always came back, always. And each time he returned, she greeted him the same way, with his name and a hand on his broad head. Weeks passed. The marks on the door frame grew, and slowly, so slowly, she almost missed it. The light began to change. The temperature climbed. Not much -40 is still death by any name, but the air moved differently. The snow softened at the edges. One morning, she heard something she hadn't heard since October. Dripping, water, moving. The icicle above the door was weeping. Mishka felt it too. His fur was loosening, shedding the winter coat in patches. His body was answering a calendar older than memory. She watched him from the doorway. Bigger every week, wilder every day. The cabin couldn't hold him anymore. She'd known that since the night he broke the door. She didn't plan a second farewell. She didn't walk him to the tree line. She simply left the door open one morning and let the forest decide. He went. Not that day or the next, but on the third morning, when the sun was high enough to warm the treetops, he walked out and kept walking. This time, she didn't stand at the tree line. She watched from the doorway. She didn't cry. She smiled. He came back 3 days later, muddy paws, pine needles in his fur, the smell of thawing earth on his breath. Spring was coming and he carried it with him. And so it became their way. He would leave. She would wait. He would return. She would greet him. And the world would turn between them. The snow melted in earnest by mid-March. The ground appeared dark and wet and impossibly alive after months of white. She stepped outside one morning without her heavy coat for the first time since October. The air hit her face and it didn't bite. It just held her. She found the first flower on the south side of the cabin. A tiny thing, purple, stubborn, pushing through half-frozen mud. She knelt beside it like it was a miracle, because it was. She brought water to it the next day. A cup. Poured it slowly around the roots, as if the earth needed reminding how to be alive. Mishka returned less often now, once a week, sometimes two. But when he came, he brought something: a fish, a root, a rabbit, and left it by the door. She kept the doorframe marks going, even when he wasn't there, because the days he was gone still belonged to them, just differently. Spring opened fully in April. The ice on the well broke on its own. The stream behind the cabin, frozen since November, began to sing. She sat on the porch Dmitri built, and let the spring air fill her lungs. She was still here, after everything, still here. She thought about the winter, about the cub at the door, about the storm, about the floor, about the warmth of 400 pounds of bear pressed against her dying body. She didn't know when Mishka would come back next. She didn't need to know. The not knowing wasn't emptiness anymore. It was trust. That evening, she cooked fish from the stream, set one plate on the table and one on the floor, just in case. She woke to a sound at the door. Not scratching this time, something heavier, a weight, leaning. She pressed her hand flat against the door. On the other side, she could feel his warmth through the wood. That was enough. That was everything. By morning, he was gone. But the plate on the floor was empty, and there were muddy paw prints on the porch. She cleaned the plate, set it back on the floor, refilled it with fish, the same as every evening. A place at the table for the one who comes and goes. Summer would come, then autumn, then winter again. And with winter, the cold, the deep, killing, beautiful cold. But she didn't fear it anymore. Not the cold, not the dark, not the silence. She had learned something that winter, something the bear had taught her without words, that you are never truly alone if you are willing to open the door. She never told anyone what happened that winter. There was no one to tell. And some stories don't need an audience. They just need to be lived. But somewhere in the taiga, between the pines and the birches and the frozen rivers that were just now learning to move, a bear carried a name through the forest: Mishka. And far away in a cabin built by a man she still loved, an old woman sat by the fire. The door was open, the plate was full, the world was turning. And she wasn't alone. A year passed. The cabin held, the woman held, the seasons turned green to gold, to white to green again, and through every one of them, the door stayed open. Mishka came back every winter, not as a cub, not as a visitor, as family. The kind that doesn't need an invitation, just an open door and a plate on the floor. He was enormous now, twice her height, 5 times her weight, but he still lowered his head when she reached for him. He still fit somehow into the space she made. She was older now too, slower. The winters took more from her each year. But every time she thought about leaving, about the town, about warmth, about ease, she looked at the doorframe, at the marks, and she stayed. She added a new mark that evening, the same as all the others, the same as the first. No bigger, no smaller, just one more day. Outside, the stars appeared. The same stars that watched the night she opened the door, the same stars that watched the night he came back. She never wrote it down, never told a soul. But the story lived in the marks on the wood, in the tracks in the snow, in the plate on the floor that was always, always full. Some people survive the cold by shutting the world out. She survived it by letting something in. An elderly woman took in a freezing bear cub in Siberia. Then it came back for her. That's not a story about a bear. That's a story about a door.